Hi, my name is Jason Langsner. I received my master's at Georgetown. I support Georgetown and Israel and do both simultaneously by giving a gift of Israel bonds. Visit israelbonds.com to learn more. Hoya Saxa.
Coming up in today's newscast, Australia recognizes West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The annual Israeli Alternative Poverty Report reveals some grim results, and a new cycling protest in Tel Aviv warns the city to be careful what it wishes for. After months of hinting, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced on Saturday that Australia will finally recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, leaving East Jerusalem for a future Palestinian state. Morrison also said that he looks forward to moving the embassy in kind, quote, when practical.
Australia believes this position respects both our commitment to a two-state solution and long-standing respect for relevant Security Council resolutions. It's a balanced view. It's a measured view. It's a well-considered view. It reinforces our clear view that the status of Jerusalem can only be resolved through direct negotiations between the parties consistent with those relevant Security Council resolutions.
But the decision was received with very mixed reviews. The Palestinian Authority, the Arab League, and several other Muslim or Arab states all condemned the move, saying it will undermine security and stability. Palestinian Authority Foreign Minister Riyad al-Malki said it showed a total bias towards Israel, and Palestinian Authority negotiator Saeb Erekat went even further, accusing Australia of violating UN Security Council resolutions, saying that, quote, all of Jerusalem remains a final status issue for negotiations, while East Jerusalem under international law is an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territory, end quote. No Israeli officials were too quick to issue congratulations either, though. Israel's official policy is that Jerusalem is and will remain the undivided capital of the Jewish state. This led to a very tame statement acknowledging the move, but not welcoming it. The Israeli Foreign Ministry thanked Australia for support against Iran and anti-Semitism and for Israel at the United Nations, but only called the recognition of West Jerusalem, quote, a step in the right direction, end quote.
אוסטרליה ידידה עמוקה ורבת שנים ואינטימית של ישראל. שמחנו לשמוע שיש לה עניין להבהיר את ההכרה שלה בירושלים כבירת ישראל, אבל לצערנו, בתוך הבשורה החיובית הזאת הם עשו טעות. אין הפרדה בין מזרח העיר למערב העיר, ירושלים אחת היא, מאוחדת, שליטת ישראל בה היא נצחית, הריבונות שלנו איננה ניתנת לחלוקה או לערעור, ואנחנו מקווים שאוסטרליה תמצא את הדרך בקרוב לתקן את המשגה שהיא עשתה.
There was no response at all from the Prime Minister's office. Perhaps the most surprising response actually comes from Bahrain, though, a country with no official diplomatic ties to the Jewish state. While the Arab League condemned Australia's, quote, irresponsible and biased decision, the Bahraini Foreign Minister Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa tweeted, quote, these are irresponsible statements. Australia's position does not hamper the legitimate demands of the Palestinians and first and foremost East Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. It also does not contradict the Arab Peace Initiative, end quote. It's not exactly a statement supportive of Israel, but it certainly doesn't appear to be against Israel either. And just earlier this month, Al Khalifa also supported on Twitter Israel's Operation Northern Shield to find and destroy Hezbollah terror tunnels from Lebanon. According to new figures released by the Israeli police, the sex, property, and violent crime rates among foreigners in Israel, particularly the migrant community, are much higher than the rest of the population. In fact, these statistics obtained through a Freedom of Information request submitted by the Israel Immigration Policy Center reveal rates as high as 3 to 4 times that of the general population. Well, Yonatan Jacobowitz from the Israel Immigration Policy Center is here now to help us break these numbers down. Yonatan, thank you for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, what are the underlying differences, maybe, to explain why these rates are so much higher in immigrant and migrant populations?
Well, I think there's 3 main reasons. First is we're talking about populations that's mostly young men, so naturally young men have a higher criminal rate than the total population. The second reason is that these are people who don't have relationship or connection with Israel, so they might not feel as obligated to society. And we have to take into account also cultural norms. We see also in other countries that we're talking about this case in Eritreans and Sudanese. In some countries we have higher criminal rates among migrants from those countries.
Okay, so to press you on this, couldn't it also be related highly potentially to the fact that many of them are in illegal status and they can't really get work or contribute in the way that society might want them to?
That could be possible if we're talking about crimes that are related to physical, but if we're talking about violence or sexual crimes,
property crimes are also here.
Exactly. So that was the word I was looking for. So when we're talking about property crimes, we can explain that. But when we're talking about sexual crimes, which are 4 times as much, you can't say that there's a relationship to the situation or the rights they have or don't have in Israel. And another point that's important to stress is that we also found that the crime rate is 3 times higher than the rate in the population of the rest of the foreigners in Israel. And the majority of the other foreigners that we compare the statistics to are here illegally, so they have less rights than these migrants, and still the crime rates are higher. So as I said, we can't. That wouldn't be a good reason for anything except for a property crime, and even then, it's not a sufficient explanation.
Okay, so again, though, what about then the fact that these figures showed more of a higher incidence of investigations and files being taken out? But does that necessarily translate to more crime? And especially because if we're talking about real numbers, 3 to 4 times the rate, but this population is only maybe 20,000, 30,000. So how does that translate into real numbers and the real threat? Who are you really?
Well, if we're talking about property crimes, we're talking about stealing, crimes. So we actually saw in absolute numbers a high rise when the majority of the migrants came in 2009, 2011,
so larceny
12.
and things like that, which again we spoke can potentially be explained by other factors.
So there we saw an actual number, and it's also important to stress that we're in some cases, and of course the majority of these people are economic migrants, the majority we believe, some are asylum seekers, the majority aren't violent criminals. But it is important to stress that we've seen many criminal activity that we haven't seen before, and a lot of them are very violent, that Israel hasn't experienced before, and that can have an accumulative effect on people living in those neighborhoods. So even if we're not talking about thousands of cases, even though the total sum number, we received 11,000 criminal cases since 2007, which is quite a lot, but even if they're not that much compared to the total population, for the people living in areas where there's a high concentration of immigrants, it could have a very harsh effect under a feeling of inner security. And it's just important to stress that we need to know these statistics in order that we can start dealing with it. If it's on a criminal level, if it's more police, anything that the government needs to do, we have to know the real numbers.
So that's what I wanted to ask you. It's my final question. What needs to be done then? You take these statistics, let's put them into action. What needs to be done to address this issue?
Okay, so first of all, more resources. It's also important that these statistics don't show the whole picture. The majority of the crime is actually inside the community, so you need more police enforcement, translation for people so that they can feel that they come to the police. And that's on one hand, make the police more accessible for the migrants themselves, because it doesn't only hurt the residents, Israeli residents, it also hurts the migrant community also. And the other side is you have to understand that the criminal system needs to have maybe harsher penalties. And another major problem we have is that people who are arrested, they don't show up for their court. So maybe sometimes the criminal courts need to hold those people in custody until their cases are dealt with. And that's something that's a little different from Israeli citizens, but once you see the statistics, there's no other choice.
All right, Yonatan, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, a new report from Israeli humanitarian aid organization Letet has just found that around 2.3 million Israelis, including some 500,000 families and over 1 million children, live below the poverty line. This accounts for over a quarter of Israel's entire population. Every year for nearly 2 decades, the organization has released its Alternative Poverty Report, which it says presents a more insightful picture into poverty than the National Insurance Institute's annual survey. And the report examines housing, education, health, food security, and the ability to meet the cost of living as factors in determining poverty. Letet also included in its report surveys of the Israeli public and found that when asked what the 2 most urgent issues are, 66% of respondents included poverty and social gaps in either first or second place. This is compared to 54% who said state security. Accordingly, 3/4 of the Israeli public believes that the government should bear the responsibility in dealing with this issue, but that dealing with poverty is low or non-existent on the government's agenda. These statistics show that Israel has one of the highest poverty rates and child poverty rates in the developed world, and that the Israeli public views this as a top priority. We just hope the government finally takes it as seriously as the community seems to.
Moscow is now reportedly allowing Hezbollah and other pro-Iranian Shiite groups operating in Syria to carry Russian flags in order to protect them from Israeli airstrikes. According to Russia's Kommersant newspaper, Russian flags were seen near the military airport in Syria, where Iranian targets were previously attacked by Israeli air forces, and flags were also seen flying in the cities of Homs and Idlib. The Russian paper explained that Israel issued a complaint to Moscow ahead of its military delegation to the country last week, but the IDF spokesperson has so far declined to comment on the Russian report. Relations between Israel and Russia, meanwhile, have cooled down since the accidental downing of a Russian plane in Syria in September. Russia still blames Israel for that incident, but the two countries have nevertheless kept diplomatic channels open, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu conversing with Russian President Vladimir Putin regularly and providing updates of the Hezbollah terror tunnels as well. In related news, Israel has uncovered a fourth Hezbollah terror tunnel along its northern border and has reportedly neutralized the threat by booby-trapping the passages on Israel's side. The two IDF soldiers murdered on Thursday in a drive-by shooting near Givat Asaf were laid to rest on Friday. The two other soldiers wounded in the attack remain in hospital, but 19-year-old Sergeant Yosef Cohen and 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Yoval Mor-Yosef were murdered when a terrorist leaped out of his car and shot at his victims in close range. This was next to the Givat Asaf outpost.
Friends and families paid tribute to the fallen soldiers, and a soldier from their unit said, quote, "Everyone loved them. They were people who were always willing to volunteer. They were good people, salt of the earth," end quote. Yossi Cohen served as a lone soldier because his ultra-Orthodox family did not accept his decision to join the IDF, and just a few hours before the shooting, Mor-Yosef messaged his father that he volunteered for guard duty that day so that his friends could go home and get some needed rest. The attacker, on the other hand, fled the scene of the shooting, launching a massive IDF manhunt to find him. It wasn't until Friday that he turned himself in. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded in a statement saying that he will accelerate the demolition of terrorists' homes, will continue efforts to apprehend murderers, and will increase IDF reinforcements around checkpoints in the West Bank. He also decided to legalize thousands of homes in Judea and Samaria, requesting that Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit enable construction of 82 new residential units in Ofra as well. Netanyahu wrote, quote, "They think they can uproot us from our land. They will not succeed," end quote. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, on the other hand, have issued their praises over last week's string of attacks, leading Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz to condemn Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's incitement campaign against Israel again, saying, quote, "Whoever pays the terrorists and gives out awards to them, whoever welcomes terror activity and teaches their children hatred, is responsible for these attacks," end quote.
Israeli security forces encountered a lot more terrorist activity as the weekend progressed, starting with a stabbing attack on Friday near Bet El in the West Bank, in which an Israeli soldier, Nave Rotem, from the Kfir Brigade, was injured. Rotem is in a hospital in stable condition now, but this was the fourth major attack in just a week, marking a sharp recent uptick in Palestinian violence.
The suspected terrorist from Bet El has since turned himself in, but it didn't stop the IDF from performing a wave of arrests anyhow. 40 Palestinians, 37 of whom are Hamas members, were arrested on suspected involvement in terrorist activities on Thursday, and then during arrest raids near Ramallah on Friday in Al-Bireh, 6 Palestinians were reportedly injured, and another was fatally shot during clashes with the IDF. Dozens more Hamas members and lone terrorists were then arrested Friday and Saturday as well, including one of the suspected Ofra shooters, Mohammed Barghouti, and 2 armed Palestinian men who were picked up outside the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron. One had an Uzi submachine gun, and the other an M16 assault rifle. Speaking with Israeli Ynet News, a Golani officer said, quote, "There's a sense of an increase in the level of terrorism. It makes our fighters more alert, while our offensive action causes the Palestinians to think twice before allowing firearms in their homes," end quote. But still, there is a sense of more tension in the area recently, and former defense ministers Ya'alon and Lieberman now again seem to agree on why. Ya'alon contributed the last week's violence on Israel's, quote, "weak response to Hamas in Gaza." He said, quote, "We should have hit Hamas hard when it flew the fire kites into our territory. This was a violation of our sovereignty and it needed a tough response," end quote.
Additionally, over the recent rise in terror, hundreds of Israeli civilians are also now raising their voices in protest against the government's action or lack thereof. On Thursday, demonstrations rallied outside the Prime Minister's office, waving Israeli flags and carrying signs reading that the Israeli nation is not terrified.
Some protesters even held a picture of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, marked as a target, though. Then in Tel Aviv, the families of victims Kim Levengron Yechezkel and Ziv Hajbi, who were murdered at the Balkan Industrial Park in October, held similar protests. They were joined by Simcha Golden, the father of the IDF soldier Hadar Golden, whose body is being held by Hamas in Gaza, and they called on Israelis to join them Saturday night at Kikar Rabin to demand that Israel take a tougher stance on terror. In fact, most of the protesters' arguments largely lined up with former defense ministers Ya'alon and Lieberman, who claimed that Israel's failure to respond harshly to Hamas rockets in November gave a green light to future violent terror tactics.
But I came here because the person that is in charge for the lack of security all over Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu, that gave the terrorists a green light to attack Jews all over, 500 missiles on the north, and without no response from the government, and attacking all over Judea and Samaria. Netanyahu has to go home. Netanyahu failed. Netanyahu finished his mission, and he has to go home and resign.
Imagine a customer looking at some sort of product or service online and then really wanting a coupon or some sort of promotion to seal the deal. Well, Israeli startup Yells can enable any company to do just that. And joining me with how is Sharon Maybloom, the co-founder and CRO of Yells. Sharon, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, all right, tell me all about Yells, how it works, and who it's for.
Okay, so imagine, for instance, you're selling a car, or you have a mobile repair shop, and you're advertised on a classified website, say Yad 2 or B144. Yeah. Do you just place the ad and wait for someone to call? It really doesn't work that way because there's a lot of competition.
You need more engagement.
Yeah, you need more engagement. So what we do is we give the advertisers superpowers. Now they actually can know when there's a potential customer online looking for their product or service. And not only do they know that, they can engage with that customer and ask him to chat with them or send a coupon.
In real time?
Yeah, in real time.
So how does that work? It's like, if I'm, hovering my mouse over a car ad, or if I click on the ad and I'm visiting a website or something like that, how does that engage me?
It really depends on the marketplace we're working with. When we work with a marketplace, when we partner with them, they decide on the business rules that really work on that website. But what happens is, if a customer is looking for a specific car, for instance, then we know to alert the right seller and let the seller start engaging with the potential customer.
So, okay, what kind of companies are you already working with? You mentioned automotive.
Yeah, we are working with classified websites. We work with Web.com, which are a huge American company. Sure. They have 3.5 million websites of SMBs in the States, and we're
working. So you kind of expanded into all those different websites.
Yeah, we're in the websites and the directories in the UK. We're also in Asia, in Singapore, and in Southeast Asia. We're starting to work here in Israel with a major player that I can't really reveal the name yet.
Sure.
And we're actually in a very exciting pilot now with Microsoft on Bing, on the search engine. Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
Hopefully you'll see our capabilities on Bing search engine pretty soon.
And then, okay, and this isn't like a bot at the other end when somebody is talking to you or offering you some sort of deal. This is an employee who's...
Yes, it's the real advertiser, the real service provider or seller. He is the one that's interacting with you. And now you as a customer, when you go into a website, you don't have to download anything to start engaging. Okay. You get a chat invite and you can start engaging with that potential seller without giving any details, without logging in. You don't have to give your Facebook account or email or anything. You just start engaging with different sellers, getting different proposals and closing the deal with whoever you want to close it.
All right, well, Sharon, thank you so much for coming in. Yells, it sounds amazing. Congratulations and good luck in the future.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, now in addition to the yellow vests and the families of the victims of terror, one more group of protesters hit the streets of Tel Aviv this past weekend. The Critical Mass Tel Aviv group organized what is to be the start of many cycling protests on the city on Friday. But rather than just making demands, the demonstrators actually gave the city a taste of what they're asking for.
For years, but increasingly over the past few months, cyclists in Israel have been begging for dedicated bike lanes, especially as efforts to fine bikers who ride on the sidewalks have risen, right alongside bike and auto-related accidents. So protesters arrived at 11 in the morning on Friday at Habima Square, setting off as a solid cycling block throughout the city in a massive spiral route. Bikers blocked off whole sections of the street and intersections as protest leader Tanya Tzul desperately and rhetorically asked onlookers where she might find the nearest bike path. The idea is that if police and city officials force bikers off the sidewalk but without installing lanes, then massive traffic congestion and heightened risk to riders and motorists alike will be the result. How does the city know? Well, they were just given a taste. The protest is now also scheduled to resume twice a month until some change is made, and the next ride is set to begin at 1 p.m. from Kikar Rabin on Friday, December the 28th.
Good news for Israeli tourism because the Latin American airline LATAM has officially inaugurated new direct flights between South America and the Jewish state. And ILTV's Latin American correspondent Joy Gavijon has all the details. Joy, thank you for coming in today.
Of course, yes.
All right, so tell me about LATAM and this new promotion.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that this is very exciting, and that I know many people that are going to be interested in these flights because this flight that they're offering is the first one that it's going to go straight with no stops from Brazil, actually Sao Paulo, South America, straight to Israel.
Only from Sao Paulo, though.
Only from Sao Paulo for now, but still that's a very big connection for all the other Latin countries. So.
From Sao Paulo, yeah, I mean, how long does it take to go from Sao Paulo really anywhere else?
Well, it depends, but it can take like 4 hours, 6 hours.
So not too bad after that.
It's not too bad at all.
All right, but until now, what did you have to do?
Yeah, so until now, there was no one offering this kind of service. There were no direct flights from South America to Israel. El Al did it for a while, but then they stopped. But basically, what you had to do is stop somewhere in Europe or Asia, let's say France, Italy, Spain. So it was a lot of time put on just one trip, you know? Wow.
All right. So is this, I don't know, because you mentioned you probably already know a lot of people who are going to be very excited to hear about this.
Yes.
So is this, do you know of people who are going to be making more trips to this? How expensive are the flights, I should ask as well?
Well, so far we don't know how expensive the flights are going to be. And I know people who are interested, but they don't have the entire information, you know, the whole picture. But what we do know is that they're going to have 3 flights every week available. And it's going to be I think it's a Sunday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays.
So high traffic days.
Yeah, high traffic days, and it's a flight that lasts approximately 11 hours. So
that's not so bad.
It's not bad at all.
From Israel to the Americas, 11 hours is pretty standard.
It's pretty standard.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm actually from Detroit, and you know that. But
I know that. Yeah,
you know that. But I'm from Detroit, and we don't have any direct flights either. So
you know that it's a struggle. Every time you want to go, it's a struggle.
It is a struggle. But all right, well, hopefully this will increase tourism. Will increase.
Hopefully it will. Yeah, actually, I have the numbers here. I want to tell you that between January and November this year, 146,000 Latin American tourists came to Israel, which is a 62% increase compared to 2016. So if this goes well, I guess that we're going to see a lot more.
It sounds like it's kind of like in response to that almost, and then...
Exactly, it sounds like it.
Like a thank you.
And probably we'll get more Israelis going to Latin America too.
I hope so. I want to make a trip, and now it's easier.
Me too. So let's just plan.
Let's do that. All right. Joy, thank you so much for coming in.
Of course, Art.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. According to a report released by NGO Latet, about 1 million adults and 1 million children in Israel live under the poverty line. And so to raise awareness, today's word is oni, meaning poverty. Poverty, or oni, is the state of being poor, or ani, and unfortunately in Israel, increasing consumer prices on food, electricity, water, and more will only make poverty, or oni, worse. Many private and public organizations have been founded to fight oni, but as we know, poverty persists. So it's up to all of us as individuals to be socially conscious and to do what we can. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cloudy and cool with a low of 56 or 13 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow will be partly cloudy and with a chance of rain, with an expected high of around 68 or 20 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.77 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.
From inception, Israel bonds have exemplified l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation. Legendary President Shimon Peres praised this historic enterprise, observing, "The strong ties between Israel bonds and the State of Israel have been as resilient and fruitful as the land of Israel itself."